This class is about plotting and publishing drawings with .NET. So basically almost anything that deals with the plotting and publishing process, from the setup to going through the output process, then we'll talk about today. So what should you know? You should already know how to use AutoCAD, obviously, already. What we're going to talk about does go back a number of releases. I didn't go back any further than 2010, basically, but just be aware it might flow back further than that. You should already know Visual Studio 2010 of some sort, either Express, Professional, up to you. Everything they've shown today will work in Express. There's just some things that you'll need to know on how to set up. VB.NET, C#. I'm going to go through and show VB.NET today, but all the sample code is in C# as well. So it's up to you what language you want to work with after you leave here. Both samples are identical, and those are on the Autodesk University website then. So an overview of the session then. We're going to take a look at creating and importing named layouts then. Obviously you can't import model space, that's a different place. So these are the layout tabs, layout 1, layout 2, so essentially paper space then is what we're going to be working with. Creating and setting up viewport objects that are on a layout, not in model space. Working with visual styles, render presets, creating page setups, copying those to a layout or assigning them to a layout then, as well as looking to see what plot configurations, plot styles are available to your application that the user already has available through their AutoCAD then. And then obviously the most important part, once and everything's set up, the plotting and publishing of a drawing then. So my name is Lee Ambrosius. I started working for Autodesk about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I was a consultant to them, and then was a customer for a large furniture manufacturer that I automated a lot of their systems using various different APIs that AutoCAD offers, from menu customization all the way straight up to Object-ARX then. As part of Autodesk, I do deal with the all-important customization, developer, and CAD administration content. So that means the Autolist documentation, VB.NET, Object-ARX, that all goes across my desk and basically up and gets posted then. So I'm responsible for that. So if there's a question or concern about the documentation, let me know either after the class today, through email. I'll try to address it then. I've been customizing AutoCAD for about 16 years now, and a user for 18 years. I've contributed to a number of AutoCAD-related books, anywhere from a dummy series to the AutoCAD Bible series, primarily in customization then, as well as programming. So a lot of those chapters that are in those types of books I wrote as well for that author. As well as Augie Hot News and Augie World over the years. I've written articles on customization, programming, in general, just design and stuff like that in AutoCAD. So please quiet your phones. My phone is quiet. Shouldn't do anything, but please quiet your phone. Leave quietly if you need to. I'll allow time during the session. Obviously, if things seem like they're getting behind, then I'll kind of start having you hold questions until the end then. So what will you need? This is already important. If you're already using .NET, chances are you're probably already referencing these files anyways. AC Core MGD.dll was introduced in 2013. There's core functionalities dealing with the editor. Publishing and plotting is now in there, as well as defining commands. Some of that stuff before was part of ACMGD.dll. So ACDBMGD.dll to access objects that are in your drawing. So your layouts dictionary, the viewport objects themselves, so anything that's present actually inside of your drawing. And then ACMGD.dll, there's some application level things that you'll need, especially when working with render presets. You'll see that they're not exactly completely inside of the drawing. It makes it actually one of the more hard things to understand. And then ACCM components 19.tlb I'll be using today as part of the publishing aspect of the class, so I can open a sheet set and then find out all the drawings that are in there and then be able to publish those out then. So basically bypassing the whole sheet set manager then. Classes. This is part of the nitty-gritty, dirty part of .NET, obviously. You need to know classes, where things are at, as well as the namespaces and stuff in order to start using this stuff. A lot of this stuff, as I go through it, you're going to start seeing that a lot of these start overlapping things. Whether you want to publish or plot, you're going to need to know layouts and where all this stuff happens to be sitting. So I'm just going to kind of go quickly through some of them, and I'm not going to really talk about them later on individually when I show specific samples working with layouts or working with viewports or page setups and stuff. It's all just going to just kind of build and kind of intertwine as we go along then. So DB dictionary, the layouts, plot styles and stuff are stored in a named dictionary inside of your drawing. That's just how layers and everything else are stored. They're either in a table record or as part of a dictionary then. A dictionary entry is obviously going to be a specific layout or a specific page setup. That's part of the drawing then. The layout manager allows you to do what it just almost sounds like, work with layouts. But what the layout manager only allows you to do is work inside of the current drawing. So if you need to work with a layout that's not in the current drawing, you need to work with the dictionary object then. And then obviously the objects themselves, things like layout. It represents the tab or the paper space representation of a layout. Viewport, that's part of a layout, so you can see your model that's in model space. DB visual style is a visual style object. So the 2D wireframe, the 3D hidden and stuff like that, those are all visual styles that you could create yourself then and apply if you have custom settings or preferences. Instead of having to worry about copying those or making sure those are in the drawing, you could actually create those on the fly then as well. Mental array render settings, those are render presets then. So if you're into rendering viewports and 3D objects, then that's something that you maybe want to do because those are very specific to your needs as well then. Plot settings and plot settings validator and structure, those are working with page setups in the layout information themselves. So whether or not you're going to plot or publish to a window, paper size and stuff like that, those allow you to set those types of settings for a layout object or creating a named page setup to use as part of the plotting or publishing aspect. Plot info validator allows you to work with PC3 files and stuff like that and make sure those are configured correctly. Plot engine does what it basically sounds like. Allows you to output your drawing or layout then to a hard copy through something through a PC3 file. That might be a DWF file. It might be a paper copy. Plot progress dialog box simply just allows you to get information back from the plot engine to figure out where it happens to be going along, which drawing or which plot is currently in progress. DSD entry collection and DSD entry. Those are, if you've used the publish feature, you create a DSD file. This allows you to create that DSD file and work with plotting or publishing, in that case, multiple layouts at a single time then. So you can create your page setup overrides and stuff like that and be able to dump all that stuff out. DSD data is more specific to the layout information that's part of a DSD entry in itself. Publisher, it allows you to capture and publish DSD files then. So this is the actual publishing pipeline that the publish command and dialog box use then. Plot config info, those are the PC3, it's more information about the PC3 files. And then the plot configuration manager allows you to figure out which plot styles and plot configuration files that your application can access then and assign to your current page setups then. There's only 3 namespaces that you're going to have to be concerned with. Chances are if you're doing .NET already, you're already using Autodesk.AutoCAD.database services to create and store objects. Autodesk.AutoCAD.plotting services is the plotting engine and where the configurations, you will be working with the plotter configurations and plot styles. And then Autodesk.AutoCAD.publishing is obviously where you're going to be working with the publish layouts aspect of it. Any questions so far? Rather kind of dry information. But you can see now that we kind of have an idea what these things are. For layouts, you're going to be needing to understand and work with dictionary objects, dictionary entries, or the layout manager and the layout object. Based on your needs, if you're working with the current drawing all the time, you only really need to worry about the layout manager, and it actually makes things rather very simple and straightforward with you. But if you want to be able to copy or import a layout that might be in a different drawing, you can do that as well then. You can basically go and work with, open that up in the other drawing in memory, work with the dictionary, the layouts dictionary, and then pull that information across into your current drawing. Or verify that other drawings in a batch process follow your CAD standards. And then there's the autodesk.autocad.database services namespace. So I'm going to take a look at using the layout manager. I'll show the layout manager primarily today. That allows you to create new layouts, duplicate existing ones that are already inside of your drawing, rename them, and delete them. So just like some of the stuff that you can do through the UI, it all can be done through the API as well then. And as I mentioned, if you're not working with the current drawing, you need to work with the layout dictionary. So the sample code that I'm going to show and step through, there's layout list, layout create, layout import. Layout list is just simply going to look in the current drawing and give me a listing of those layouts. Layout create, just as it sounds like, it's going to create a new layout using the layout manager. Layout import is going to go and import a layout from an external drawing. So in that case, I'm going to actually go into it and pull out the layout using through the dictionary then. So inside of Visual Studio, the first one that we look at, obviously we need to work with the active document and database. Most of the stuff is going to be very familiar. You're going to have to create a transaction based on what you want to do. You're going to open the layout dictionary. In this case, I'm opening it for read. I'm just simply writing on a general message that says, here's my layouts. And then I have a for each loop that simply just steps through and looks at each dictionary entry and then outputs its name in this case or key. So that's all it's going to do is just simply output it to the command prompt. Is there any questions so far? Yep.
If you start a transaction and you do nothing, what's the quick just abort it? Just
Abort. I usually abort if I'm not going to make any changes. If you close, then it just it creates an undo record, or commit, one and a two. If you commit, then it creates an undo record. If you abort, then the record isn't maintained. So it depends on what your needs are. That's not. I thought I had it right. Yep. Yay. So layout list just simply just returns the order list. Now there is a way to get the order that these layouts do specify at the bottom. So that's part of the dictionary, and each entry has and knows which order it happens to be part of. So you could return the correct ordered list if you wanted to, as well as figure out which tab you're currently on and which one's the previous tab or the next one in the list as well. So the next sample is using the layout manager then in this case to create a new layout. So I simply just call layout manager.current to get the current layout. I'm going to create a new layout using .create from the layout manager, get its object ID, open it for read, and check to see if it's currently selected or not, if it's an active tab, which it most likely isn't. Then using current layout, the property, I can just use the layout name of the layout that I just created to set it current. And in this case, it just simply outputs its tab order, as well as whether or not it's been selected, and its block record ID. So the actual object inside of the drawing database that represents paper space in this case. So you can actually go after the paper space object and modify it and add, your title block or any other annotation that you might need to your layout. Fairly easy, fairly straightforward. So in this case, I just simply have a default. So it's just like if I would right-click and create a new layout from scratch then. Layout import is probably a little bit more useful. If you have a DWT that may already have a layout already in it, it might be configured with your title block, viewports and stuff like that. You can pull that stuff into your drawing then, very similar to the import option from the layout command then. So in this case, I'm doing a little bit more work. Obviously, the drawing is out there externally, so I'm opening and creating an external instance of a database in memory, and then I'm reading in the file that contains my layout that I want in my current drawing then. So I'm opening up a sample that comes with AutoCAD then, just the a-01.dwg, and I want a specific layout from that drawing into my current drawing then. So then I simply just go through that drawing, find where that layout happens to be at. Does it contain a specific layout name? And so it's looking for this layout name up here. It's the main and second floor plan then. So that's the name of the layout then that appears on the tab. Does it exist? If it exists, then we want to get that information. You need to create an object ID collection. This is a little bit more advanced than what you need, but there is a need for it at times. So it's basically getting all the object IDs so that I can cleanly copy them from the other drawing. Because things like layers and textiles might not exist in the current drawing, so all of that stuff is going to come across then as well. Then I'm going to work inside of my current drawing and then create and make sure that there's a table record or a block table, or a block entry, sorry, that is corresponding to the one that we want to create. So we want to create a new paper space object in order to copy all the objects that are currently assigned to that external layout into the drawing then. And then we simply just do a W block clone. Like I said, some of this stuff might be a little more advanced than where you're at, but you can at least simply start from it if that's something that you're interested in doing as well. So it copies the block and all the other information across from the external drawing, as well as the layout information, which contains your current plot settings. So down here's where the plot settings name is. You can see we're adding plot style setting dictionary. And as I go through the other samples, you see that a little bit more broken down. So this one's kind of a combination of other stuff that I'm going to talk about as well then. And then simply we're going to regen the drawing so the layout shows up, and we're going to get a message that it couldn't be imported if it couldn't find it, or it's just going to simply happen if it can then. So now I see I have a new layout at the bottom called main second floor plan. When I click on it, here's my layout from that other drawing then. So it pulled everything across that was related to that drawing. So the title block came across, plot settings, any type of layers and stuff like that that is specific to that title block came across as well then. Any questions? Useful? Okay. Floating viewports. Obviously, once you create a layout, you need to create something on it so you can see the design that happens to be part of model space then. Chances are you might not personally create a viewport. That may be done by the designer or drafter based on the size that they need. There are times where you may want to automate it so that they can simply just move stuff around, or if you know where their specific views are inside of your drawing, so that you can create viewports as well. Modifying is by far more common than the actual creation of a viewport, though, from what I've seen then. But you may have a need that I'm not aware of, though. So these are floating viewports that are part of the layout, not the tiled viewports that are part of model space. Those are a different type of object then, and that's not discussed in this class. So you're going to be working with the viewport object then, and then we're going to assign the viewport to the layout so it can actually be displayed then. So example is viewports create floating. So I'm going to create both a non-rectangular and a rectangular viewport so you can see how you can kind of clip a viewport then using a circle or a spline or whatever you need to do for a closed object then if you have that particular need. Maybe it's a matter of just kind of customizing it so if there's a specific non-rectangular viewport that you use, you can just have the user click on the viewport and then you can draw the geometry and clip it then for them as well. So part of the modification process versus more of creation. One of the things that you'll see as well is I'm calling a method called ACED set current viewport or vport. That's part of the Object ARX SDK. There's not really an easy enough way to set a viewport current in the .NET API. So that is also shown in the sample as well. So it's simply, once you get back, it's kind of just simple, just cut and paste then. So I'm going to go back to my new layout. Just simply, it's just less cluttered. Go into my sample code. And when you download the sample code, it's actually broken out into the chapters that align with the handouts. So there's one on layouts, one on viewports, visual styles, and so on as well. So it's easy to go through and look at the code then. As I mentioned, there's an import function happening at the top that's calling in the ACED set current viewport function then from Object ARX. So there's no additional code. It's just simply just using what's already defined by Autodesk. So in the viewports create floating function or command in this case, once again, create your transaction, active document and stuff. We're going to open the table record for read that happens to be related to the current paper space object then. We're going to make sure that we're not in a viewport at that time on the current layout. We're going to make sure that we're in paper space so that we can actually draw the objects and switch to a active layout. If there's any existing viewports in this case, if they already exist, we're just going to simply just remove them or erase them from the layout. And then we're going to create two new viewports then. So the first one is going to be 7.5 by 7.9 units high. We're going to set a custom scale, lock it, similar stuff that you already do through the UI then. Assign a visual style, in this case called sketchy. Append that the viewports to the block table. Set a view direction, so in this case a southwest looking view. Make sure that's turned on, because by default a lot of the viewports are turned off, so if you want to do multiple viewports at one time, you can easily enough have them off and then go turn them all at one time to cause one regen instead of multiples then. In this case, we're going to create a second viewport that's non-rectangular that happens to be circular and assign it a different custom scale. So we're going to have basically a rectangular viewport with a non-rectangular up in the upper right-hand corner. And in this, for the circular one or non-rectangular viewport, I'm going to assign a render preset, and I'll cover this more later in the class as well as the code. The render presets need to be, for plotting, need to be assigned to a different dictionary than where they're defined. So each viewport has an entry for a render preset. So in this case, this code is just simply just making sure that the medium render preset is assigned to it. So there's just using one of the preset renders. So then down here's where I'm creating my circle, and then assigning it as the clip object for the viewport itself then. So clipping a viewport is basically simply just that amount of code. It's not, there isn't a whole lot of extra overhead then. And then assigning that, the circle object as well as the viewport, to the drawing database, setting a different viewing angle, and then switching to paper space and making sure a rectangular viewport is current then. Any questions? Cool? Useful? So then if we right-click on the viewport, and if we look at display locked, removed, and we look at shade platter, you can see that it is assigned medium for the render preset. We do the same thing for the rectangular. In this case, the display is locked, as the code said, and it's set to sketchy. So you could step through your layouts and make sure the correct visual style is set for them, or render preset, if you need to do an automated process. All right, visual styles. Obviously, I showed a little bit of code. I'll step through it a little bit more on how it actually is done versus just seeing it just do it then. You need to work with the dictionaries, dictionary entries, the DB visual style, so actually the visual style object itself, and the mental render settings object is used for the render presets then. If you looked at any of the API documentation, this is missing from the developer's guide at the moment then. So a lot of this additional stuff is stuff that I've been working on, is coming then in the next updates and stuff. So visual styles themselves are stored in access from the visual style dictionary. So there's a layouts dictionary, there's various other different dictionaries and stuff like that. Visual styles are stored there as well. So just like I did before, I can list them, I can create them, I can copy them, modify them, rename them. I can set it current using a system variable. Visual styles are assigned to viewports as well as plot settings, which happens to be just another term for page setup as well as the layout then. So those are things that you need to know to make sure that your viewports and your layouts plot correctly then when you go to plot them. Render presets. This is by far one of the more interesting things that I wanted to make sure that I got into this class, because it is, at times, it took me a little bit to figure it out, to say none the least. And even internally, it took me to figure out who to talk to on how to do it. You would think that render presets would be fairly similar to things like visual styles or layouts that are just simply part of the drawing, and you would just work with them. That's half of the story. Custom render presets are stored in the drawing, but the predefined ones, like your draft, your medium, low, those are actually stored with the application, and you don't actually have access to those themselves. So you have to work at two different levels. So you kind of see there's things that I'm doing in order to make it kind of work from a coding stance to be able to copy like a medium render preset and stuff. Not only is it different to work with this, but it also has its own little twist as well, which I'll explain. There's two different dictionaries that you need to work with. One stores your custom render presets. That's ACAD underscore render presets. Then there's a second dictionary that holds the copy. It is a copy, not a reference to, copy of the render presets for plotting. So there's a copy created for each one of the viewports that you assign a render preset to. There's a copy created every time you go and assign it to a page setup or a layout. And that was by far one of the most trickiest things that it took me to figure out, was that it was a copy, not a reference to. Like a text style, you create it once and reference it to as many text objects as you want it to. In this case, it simply creates a copy of it into a different dictionary so that basically you end up with this orphan set of settings. It's not probably the ideal solution, obviously, based on how everything else should work, but that's how it does work. So if I'm going to plot with a render presets, I basically need to copy that information and then link it to my viewport or my layout. And the sample code basically shows that process then as well. So just like other things, I can list render presets that are part of the drawing. I can find out which ones are part of the application, which you kind of have to go through a layer of code to get to them. They're stored, like I said, they're stored someplace else. You can assign a render preset to a viewport. You can duplicate them, copy them, modify them as needed then, as well as set which one is current. Just like visual styles are applied to viewports and plot settings. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a way to list the visual styles as well as list the render presets that are in the drawing or application based on which one I'm working with, as well as create a visual style or create a render preset from scratch. So to list a visual style then, I need to work with the visual style dictionary. So I need to get its ID as part of a transaction. And just very similar to working with the layouts as part of a dictionary, I'm just going to simply step through each one of the dictionary entries and then grab each one of the visual styles that's part of it, open it for read, and then determine whether or not it's internal use only, and if not, then I'm just going to output it. There are some that are marked as internal only, and those are read only, and sometimes they're hidden and they're used for verticals. So you can list all of them if you want to. These are ones that I'm listing as the only ones that you should modify then without something else happening or some additional testing then involved. Oh, not what I wanted to press. So there's all the visual styles that are currently in this drawing then. The next set of code then works basically the same way. So I'm going to work with the visual style dictionary, and then I'm going to create a new visual style called my VS then. So whether my visual style, and then determine whether or not it exists already in the drawing. If it does, then I'm just going to simply open it for write so I can modify it. If not, I'm going to create a new visual style and set its name, and then add it to the drawing before I modify it. So I can add things and change things like description, what type it is, whether or not it's custom. I can then change various different face settings, lighting options. These are all the options that appear inside of the Visual Style Manager. Environment settings like backgrounds, edge settings, whether or not they show, number of lines, color, always on top. How the edges appear, whether or not they're intersection included, color, line type, silhouette edges. There's a lot of stuff in here. So anything that you see inside of the Visual Style Manager, you can modify then as well then. So it's not really hidden, it's just how you access it. So if I bring up the Visual Style Manager, you can see the ones that are already created. If I go to my custom command, create, it creates my visual style then for me. And then I can assign that to a different viewport inside of the drawing then. So down here you can see all the different options that were then set. through the code then. So if there's one that already existed that you needed to modify, you can modify it, you could copy it as well, instead of doing the whole thing from scratch, if there's one that's close to it. This is basically just a function that I created to go as I was doing the documentation and debugging. It simply just allows me to pass in the property and then output the data type that it's assigned. Some of those aren't very documented very well, which is another thing that we're working on. Render presets list then. So in this case, it shows that, like I mentioned before, there are render presets that are attached to the application. These basically do not change, so you can always count on there being a draft, low, medium, high presentation. The user cannot delete them out of their system or change them. So draft is always going to behave the same way. And then down here, I'm looking at whether or not the name dictionary AutoCAD _render _settings exists. This is where your custom render presets will be created. By default, the dictionary is not created inside of AutoCAD, so you may have to create it. Creating a dictionary doesn't take too much effort. It's just simply just creating a dictionary object and assigning it its name. So you can create your own dictionaries for any type of information that you may want to store inside of a drawing. It may be company information to kind of brand a drawing or something, to see if somebody else isn't getting a hold of your drawing. And then it's just simply just stepping through what the render presets that are already inside of the drawing and listing them out if they exist. If none exist, then it just simply just says no custom render presets are available. And then this bottom part is similar to the other one where it's going through AutoCAD _render _settings. It's simply looking to see which ones are available or assigned to a viewport then. So these are that additional dictionary that I mentioned that are assigned to plot settings or viewports then. So this is the copy of the stuff that's at the application level. And I think that's why this was done, is that the presets or the render presets that are the default ones that come with the program are not stored inside of the drawing. So I think this is just simply a way of how we stored them from the application into the drawing. So therefore, if you pick up the drawing from somebody else, that the render presets or settings are there already then for plotting. So it's not a broken plot then. So if I go to run my sample then, render preset lists, it lists out which render presets I have that are default. I don't have any custom ones in this case, but I do have one that's assigned to my viewport. That was assigned to my circular non-rectangular viewport before. So I assigned medium to it. That's why it's present in this other table then. Then render presets create. This code is lengthy, similar to the other one with visual styles, just because there's so many options that are involved. So I've checked whether or not my dictionaries exist or not, so I can create my custom render preset. So down here, I'm actually doing the work of actually creating my render preset. In this case, it's my preset. It's being assigned to the dictionary. I do have a helper function, in this case, a custom one that I wrote that says get default render preset. Essentially, what I'm doing is I took the time to document all the settings that are part of the medium render preset so I can essentially clone that. So I don't have to start from scratch every time. So I can clone the medium, the low, draft, and so on then when I go to create my render preset, and then simply change the properties that I need to. Down here, after I've created it, I want to then set it current. And this is where I said that there's partly it's kind of tucked up into the application itself. What we're doing is inside of the UI, there's what's known as the render engine, and some of the information is stored as part of the application, not part of the drawing. So in this case, I need to set which render preset I want current through the application, and then that goes into the drawing as needed then, so that when the user goes to assign or to use it, that's already the current render preset then. And then here's that helper function that I said. that allows me to create a render preset from scratch utilizing the settings from a different or one of the default render presets then. So basically emulates that type of information then. And as you can see, just like visual styles, there's a lot of options that you can actually assign then as well. And that's why I went through and did some of the helper function here. So I can basically say, here's draft. So everything for draft is up here. And load then overrides the draft settings and so on then. So the exact same descriptions that the default render presets will be from the application as well. So if I switch to my render tab, my preset is set current then, as well as been created. So if I go down to the render preset manager, here's all the options that I then set through my custom render preset. Anybody else could figure it out? It took me, like I mentioned, quite some time to figure out how some of these properties corresponded to in the UI and stuff like that. So as you look at the sample code then, especially for visual styles, I did kind of group it. So here's the section that appears in the UI, the properties that it relates to as well. The visual style ones are probably a little bit more easier to understand based on the property names. But they're fairly grouped together as well, once again, kind of on how the UI went. And that's how I wrote my code, is based on the order that appears in the UI. And then down here, it's already simply just showing how to set a different render preset, or a different render preset current then. So that's all you need to do in order to change which one happens to be the current one inside of AutoCAD then at that point in time. Questions? Mind numbing? Lots to absorb? Yeah. I mean, it's there. And if you have any questions when you get back, let me know. I'm definitely available to ask the questions. And it also allows us to improve the documentation. If there's something that obviously you don't understand, we then go and I will look at the documentation and see if there's things that we can do to make it a little bit easier to understand. It is a lot of stuff and a lot of settings, but it is quite powerful based on what you might need to do. All right. Plot configurations and plot styles then. To work with plot configurations, and if you kind of looked up my handouts, I'm not going to talk about how to create a plot configuration. Really, you should just do that outside of AutoCAD. There's just so many settings that you have to be concerned with, and so many different places that you would have to be considerate about, drivers and all this other stuff that you have to worry about to do it from inside of AutoCAD. There are some things you can change and do from inside of AutoCAD, but I wouldn't exactly recommend you create these things on the fly, though. But they do represent the physical or virtual devices, so to create a DWF file, PDF, your hard copy from your plot device, your HP, LaserJet, or whatever it happens to be that you're utilizing. Plot styles are the same way. Really, the only way you can do it is from outside of the API utilizing the plot styles manager. But when you are working with viewports, plot styles are very important because you can't assign a name plot style to a drawing that's color dependent. So a CTB can't be assigned to a drawing that's using name styles that requires an STB. And then vice versa as well. So as you write your code, if you're going to create your publish overrides and stuff like that, you need to know which one it happens to be, and that's part of the drawing database in these structures done. So plot settings validator allows you to basically validate your plot settings that are being assigned to a page setup. So you don't go directly and assign a PC3 file to a specific property that's assigned to your layout. You have to go through the plot styles validator, and it basically allows you to assign and say, here's my PC3 file, make sure that the paper size that I'm passing you is valid, and all this other stuff. So it does a lot of the lifting for you, so you don't need to verify that your paper size is valid against the PC3 file that you're trying to assign. So you're not assigning those as two different values independently that might conflict with each other. You're assigning it to a validator that then checks to see whether or not that's valid. And if not, then it can't assign it then. And then the plot setting structure is what's assigned to a layout or a page setup. And it simply happens to be, like I mentioned a little bit before, like extents, your plot scales, and various other settings that happen to appear in the page setups dialog box or the plot styles or the plot dialog box then. So plot style mode, property of the database. If it's 0, the drawing is currently using an STB or plot styles named plot styles. If it's 1, it's using the color dependent plot styles, which most people for the most part utilize. But you may get client drawings that use the named plot styles, and it's important that your code works correctly for those instances as well. Because otherwise you can't assign a CTB to an STB project at this point in time. So the important stuff probably for your code is more or less kind of know what it can utilize, which media is available, so which sizes are available for your device, so you can get the listing of plotters, plot styles, as well as media then. So whether or not it's an 8.5 by 11 and stuff like that. So those types of information you can access from .NET. The code is very minimal to do it. Basically, in this case, I'm just working with the active document. If you have other documents open, you would just work with it as needed then. I'm working with the plot settings validator, which is the current one in this case, as well as grabbing the get plot device list method, and just simply just stepping through the list of devices that it contains. The plotter media list is very similar. I need to grab the current plot settings validator. Which PC3 file do I want to work with? The paper size, and which ones are available. And then the plot styles. Which ones are available inside of AutoCAD. Working with the validator, the get plot style sheet list method in this case. Some of this stuff. So our plot style list will return all of them that are inside of AutoCAD support path, STB, as well as the CTBs then, so you know which ones are all available to AutoCAD. The available output devices, so even the system drivers, Snagit in this case, the Adobe PDF, my PC3 files. So anything that you see inside of the drop-down list for plotters in the page setup or the plot dialog box, you have access to use then. So here's all my media then, all the paper sizes that I have available.
Is there somewhere to cross-reference those with the display name?
If you go to, I mean, for the most part, a lot of it's just simply just removing the underscores.
Yeah, but some cases the suddenly it's user and 45 digits.
I think there is, but I would have to look. I didn't do that for this class though. That is one way of doing it too. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. there's another method. There's a canonical media name is what it is, and it's been exposed for a while even through the COM API, I believe. You're talking about being cross-referenced? Yeah, you can only set it this way. There's no backtalk between the two lists. That's what you're talking about, right? Yeah. Yeah, so the list that's outputted by the media list is the one that you have to assign to your plot configuration when you go to use the validator. It's not the one that you actually see through the UI. They are similar in most cases, though. Does it make sense? Get you going in the right direction? All right. Page setups. You can see that we're continuously reusing some of the stuff that I've already shown. Dictionaries, dictionary entries, layout manager, layouts. I mean, really, the page setups are just simply properties of a layout already because layouts inherit from page setups then. So a layout is more or less just the graphical stuff as well as page setup behind it. So a layout inherits properties from page setup. So you can, as I do this, you'll be able to see the difference that I can actually assign some of these things directly to a layout without actually creating a page setup, just like you can through the UI. I can create a page setup and assign it to multiple layouts, or I can go directly to a layout and modify its specific page setup as well. So I can list page setups, create them, modify them, delete them, assign them to a layout. Just like the things you would expect to. Listing page setups, simply stepping through a dictionary, creating them from the dictionary, as well as assigning them to a layout is simply just kind of copying information back and forth. You can clone some of the information and stuff like that as well. Layout change plot settings, so I can simply change the plot settings directly on the layout without having to assign a named page setup or going directly to it then. So our page setup is simply using the named dictionary, the plot setting dictionary then, and just simply stepping through it and reporting which page setups happen to be in the current drawing. Page setup create edit simply is going to create a new viewport or a new page setup, as well as in this case I am looking at visual styles as well in the sample, just so that I can assign a visual style to my page setup. The layout manager, layouts obviously are assigned with page setups as well, so that's doing some of that work too. So you can kind of see on how everything constantly still builds on top of itself. Once you learn some of the foundation, you can do some really complex stuff just like the UI is doing through an automated process. The more important part is down here. It just simply checks whether or not my page setup exists as part of the dictionary. If it does, then it simply just creates it or clones it. If it doesn't, otherwise it uses it. So in this case, it simply says, my page setup exists, so open it for write because we're going to modify it. If it doesn't, then I'm going to create a new plot settings based on model type. Page setups or plot settings are model specific. So the model or model space has its own page setups, as well as paper space has its own page setups. So just like the UI, I can create a page setup underneath the model tab that I can't access from a paper space because model space doesn't know what a layout happens to be. It doesn't have a layout option of what do you want to plot. So there are settings that don't go back and forth. So you have to specify the type of page setup that you're going to create. So I need to specify whether or not it's true, it's model space, or it's false, a named layout, or in this case, I'm simply just trying to create a page setup based on which layout I happen to be on, if I'm on the model layout or a paper space layout. And that's why I was grabbing the current layout using the layout manager. Done. In this area is where I'm using the plot settings validator then. I'm assigning which PC3 file I want to work with, the media size, the model type based on whether or not I'm working in paper space or model space. If I'm working in model space, I want to use the extents. If I'm in paper space, I want to make sure I'm plotting the layout. And if I'm using extents, I want to make sure it's centered. There is code in here that is commented out that shows how to set a window area. So if I only want to plot a part of my drawing, that is there as well. So it's just simply just creating a rectangular view then, as well as creating a view or using a named view here then. Setting my plot offset, plot scales, whether or not I want plot styles to show. I need to refresh the list of plotters, plot styles, and stuff to utilize them with my plot style settings. Whether you want how you want the shaded viewports to appear. In this case, however they're signed in the drawing is how they're going to plot. Level of resolution, line weights, and so on. So you can see that this has all the same options as the page setup dialog box or the plot dialog box then. And then down here I'm utilizing the plot style mode, whether or not it's true or false, and then utilizing the correct one, AutoCAD.CTB or AutoCAD.STB then. So whether I'm using named plot styles or the color dependent plot styles. In this case, I want to zoom to the paper, the extents of the paper then. This is something that the UI automatically does. It doesn't do it through the API unless you call this. Basically, you can create a layout that's kind of small on screen. What this does is kind of fills it to the screen and actually fixes the regen on the screen then. So that needs to be called as well. Or it's a nice to have anyways. So if I go to, close this out, my page setup list, and I run it, I only have one page setup in here. And that's actually from when I copied or imported that layout then from that sample drawing. So that all came across then, even the page setup did when I imported it. So if I go to page setup, create, and edit, I go to page setup. I now have my page setup. No extents in drawing. Oh, I didn't set something right. But you can obviously see that. There it is. And I have a feeling it's because my drawing is empty. That's why I got an error about extents. It simply just hasn't regenerated yet. So there's my PC3 file that I assigned to it, my CTB, and how everything else is going to be set up. Page setup assigned to layout. Simply just goes through the process of assigning a page setup to a named layout. So in this case, it just checks to see whether or not my page setup exists or not. And then simply copies the information to the named layout then. So once you do have a page setup, it's rather easy to assign it to a layout then. So if I switch over to one of my layout tabs and I go to page setup, notice it doesn't have a my page setup because it was specifically created underneath the model tab. It's only a model space page setup then. So if I run it again, setup, create, edit, Uh-oh. I think it's because it already exists in the drawing. Yeah, you'll notice that I don't handle all the error handling that's in this code. Otherwise, it would be insanely more complicated to look at. So now it's created underneath the layout. So now if I run it, if I look at my layout, you can see that layout 1 currently doesn't have a page setup assigned to it. If I go to page setup, assign to layout, the layout update's done. So if I go to my page setup manager, now it shows that my page setup has been assigned to layout 1. Then layout change plot settings just simply looks at the current layout and it reports back information about that layout, its current device, and then adjusts and updates that particular information then. So if I switch over to an A-size sheet, in this case, instead of assigning a page setup to the layout like before, I simply just modified the plot settings of the particular layout directly. Any questions about that? Fairly straightforward, useful. Everybody's going to go back and create tons of page setups, right? Just utilize them all over the place now because they're so easy to create. Plotting and drawing, probably the most important part of this class anyways, is simply just automating the process of plotting and drawing. You can see that in order to plot a drawing, there's lots of things that you had to worry about beforehand. Obviously, setting up a layout is important. The plot info, plot settings is important to make sure, obviously, you want the drawing to output correctly. If it's already there today, obviously, you don't have to worry about setting that stuff up. But if it's not, those are the things that you have to set up correctly first before you get, a good drawing or a good output then. So out of this, the most important part is going to be the plot engine and the plot progress bar, or dialog box. Simply, the plot dialog box, progress dialog box is the little dialog box that pops up on the screen that shows that it's currently plotting, just like the plot command does as well. So you can display that as well as get information about it. And the plot engine is simply just, sending a layout through the system then so that it does plot a drawing then. So the sample that I have is called plot layout. Very straightforward. Plots the current layout of to a DWF file then in this case. So you could use any PC3 file that's on your computer, plot to hard copy, plot to PDF. It's the same process then. There's nothing extra that you really need to worry about then. So to plot the layout then, in this case what I'm doing is I need to know the current layout or which layout I want to plot. So you may need to use the dictionary or whatever. However you need to get to the information. I'm going to create an instance of the plot info from the layout object itself because the layout knows what information or how it should plot. If not, you can override that information as well. So in this case, it's simply just creating a validator and it's getting the information from the layout and how things should be plotted. So down here, I'm going to use override settings then. Doesn't matter what the original layout was set to. This is how I want it to plot. I want it to plot to a DWF file. So it currently might be set up to an e-size on some plotter back at work, but I want to be able to create a quick check plot drawing. This is what I would do then. So I want to send it to a DWF file of an A-size sheet. That's just what we're going to do in this case. So it could be any device that you want it to be. And then we need to do some other work with the plot info validator. This simply just allows us to make sure that the information that we want to use to go to the plot engine then is valid. It does some error handling and stuff like that, as I mentioned before, to make sure that what you're sending actually can be utilized then for plotting. Checks whether or not the current progress that something is plotting or not plotting. Obviously, you can't plot multiple things at one time. This is a little bit different because it just happens to be where it happens to be at. The plot engine is underneath the plot factory, so we're going to create a publishing engine. So this is not the same as publishing a drawing or a layout, though. Then we're going to create a plot progress dialog box to get information back so we can cancel out the job, whether or not which sheet is being plotted and stuff. And then the range. So this is just simply just setting up how that dialog box reports back to us, the current information. Whether or not it's visible, invisible. Then we're going to start the plot process. Which document am I going to plot and where it's going to go? So in this case, I'm going to output it to a location called on my C drive in the My Plot folder. Some layout information name and more progress information. So if there are some ways of plotting a few different drawings at one time. It's not really recommended though. Plotting is simply just for one drawing at a time for the most part. Okay, lots of code, lots of things that are happening. So we want to send our layout to the plot engine, as well as we want information back as a user to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing on screen then. Close my dialog boxes. Go back to my other drawing so we have something semi-useful to look at. Plot, layout. There's our plot progress box. It's gone. And just because I have background plotting turned on, it is then plotting in the background as well. Publishing you couldn't, or you shouldn't. It still has problems. Plotting you can, publishing you shouldn't. So then you can view your plot information. And then it went to or it didn't. Well, hold on. Or it didn't. Well, it went to, oh, I know, okay. It went to, I forgot exactly how this was set up. It goes to my C drive into a file named my plot. So right there's today's date, today's time. There's my layout. Sorry about the confusion there. So it's going to C:\myplot.dwf is where it went then. Any questions on that? Yes?
How can you include some property, object property information? When you are creating DWF, you can have some data, like attribute data.
Attribute data?
For example, in AutoCAD map,
Yep.
you can, when you are creating DWF, you can have your information, your GIS information
Okay.
attached to your viewer. How do you reach to the code?
you'll see that, and I'll show you how you can do that. In a little bit, we're going into publishing next. The question was, how do you link object data in the case of like blocks, attribute data to your DWF and stuff like that? And that's handled on the publishing aspect. So when you go into the publish options dialog box, you can specify which block attribute template and how that information comes across. You basically specify through the publishing pipeline those properties, and the publishing engine handles it. So if you go and create for instance, go and create a publish, go through the publish dialog box and save your DSD file, all the layouts, all your options, that goes into an ASCII file that you can open up in Notepad and you can see all the XML code that then you can set those properties specifically as part of the DSD file. So you can create your own DSD file using a text editor. So you can just do that through the API partially. Sometimes all those options aren't even available on AutoCAD. So you basically create as much of the DSD file that you want through the API, open the API through the XML APIs themselves, and then add or remove what you want. Or you can just simply just parse it as well. And for the most part, it's just an ASCII file that you can just parse and then know what section you're in and add any type of additional properties that might be vertical specific. In that case, it's going to be vertical specific. It's not going to be part of the publish API. That's what they're basically doing too, is they're creating the DSD file from scratch, partially from, they're using the API for most of it, and then they're editing the DSD file directly and adding additional layers of information. And then through the publish engine, it knows how to handle those properties. So it's not always part of the actual exposed blah, 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 dot property equals that information. That's not always exposed. But you'll see how that's done, because I have one that shows how to use the API, and then one that uses it just simply from scratch, just opening a file in memory and writing all the information to it to create my DSD file that I can just open up and publish or pass through to the publish engine.
I don't do that. I have a template DSD file, just hopefully go by replacing some of the text.
Right. That's basically what that's basically what it is. Yeah. So publishing multiple layouts, or in this case a sheet set, you need to work with, as I kind of just touched on, their DSD files. The DSD entry collection is all the layouts that you want to publish. Each one of those layouts happens to be a DSD entry, and then there's general DSD data where how you want the DWF file to be created, whether it's single sheets, multiple sheets, all those same options that appear inside of the publish dialog box, for the most part, are accessible through these three things. Now, not everything is. Based on some verticals are doing a little bit of different stuff. You have to kind of manually, through opening the DSD file once when it's created, editing some things and then resaving it and then pushing it through the publish engine. So not everything that a vertical happens or does gets into the standard AutoCAD APIs. And that's what the case is. In this case, they have kind of modified the publish engine for a vertical in that case. So, and then using the plot progress dialog box so that you can see which sheets and which information is being currently published. We're going to use the publisher and then plot config info, plot config manager to give us our information that we need to do for publishing overrides and stuff then. I didn't really specifically call out what's needed for the sheet set. I've done in the past sheet set classes, but I do have code that goes through how to open up a sheet set file itself, so the DST file, parse it, grab all the layout information, and basically utilize that and pull that into a DSD file that you can then publish it out. So I'm not getting into the finite details of how to utilize the sheet set manager or the API, because I've done it before and it's all on the Autodesk website or the AU website then. And then once we're done in this case, going to publish those out to DWF files, and then I'm going to just simply have a published PDF, so basically it publishes out 2 layouts to a PDF as well. So in this case, publish sheet set, you do want to disable the background plotting. There are ways that you can utilize the background publishing. Basically, you want to start up an instance of AutoCAD with the /PL switch and pass it the DSD file. That's not really part of the API, but that's how you can actually publish in the background. Essentially, the publish engine for publishing in the background is launching a second instance of AutoCAD. It's doing all the publishing in the background and then closing once it's done. So I'm going to just simply use environment variables, a special folder. I'm going to create a batch drawings.dsd file in my documents folder. Whether or not the file exists, if it does, then delete it so that it's clean every time. I'm going to create an instance or reference the sheet set manager in this case. And I'm going to open the IRD space edition.dst file, which is a sample that comes with AutoCAD. So I'm going to open that into the database of the sheet set manager. Then I'm going to simply just go through and get each sheet inside of the sheet set. So in this case, I'm publishing all the layouts that are part of a sheet set. So I'm going to create a DSD entry collection. So this is going to be a collection object of all my layouts then. And what gets added to this collection is a DSD entry. So I'm just going to step through the sheet set, make sure that the object that I have is actually a sheet set itself then, and a sheet. And then simply, does the layout exist in the file? So can I actually find it? If I can't find it, then what's the sense of publishing it? I can't publish something I can't find. So in this case, I'm just checking to see whether or not the sheet, its layout, and its file name exists someplace accessible from the current machine then. If so, add it to my collection then. So I'm getting the drawing name, the layout, its title, and then as well as some other information. So in this case, it's page setup overrides. So I can assign page setup or overrides to each sheet if I want to. So I step through that, and then I'm going to add additional information based on its count. So minor version, major versions of the DWF file format. For the most part, those have remained the same. Where's the DWF file going to be created? So in this case, it's going to be created to my documents, and based on the sheet set name. Sheet set type, multi-DWF. Here's the collection of drawings that I want to publish or to assign to the DSD file. Is it a sheet set? Yes. Here's its name. Is it a selection set inside of the sheet set? No, in this case. So you can see that a lot of this information is relevant to how it's done. And like I said, a lot of this simply is done. You can go through the publish dialog box, figure out how it's doing it, and just simply emulate it as well. Category name, number of copies. Obviously, it's a DWF file, so I only want one copy. If I was printing hard copy, I could get multiple copies. Here's where I want the log file. Password protected, no. Plot stamp, no. Prompt for file name, no, because I specified it earlier. Here's 3D options. The group by XREF hierarchy, publish with materials. Obviously, I'm just concerned about a 2D drawing. And then what I'm doing is I'm writing out the DSD file to the disk then. And then very similar to a lot of the plotting information, I'm setting up the plot progress dialog box. So it's all similar to before then. And then towards the end, then I'm simply just saying publish DSD. Here's where the DSD happens to be. Go and do the work then. And then after it's done, I'm simply closing the sheet set in this case and turning background plotting back on if it happened to be off or on. So restoring the value. So if I go back to AutoCAD, close my design review. So it's going to take a little bit. I mean, just like as if you're plotting in your office, it's going to take just as long. So in this case, it's opening each one of those drawings that happen to be part of that sheet set file then. So I didn't open it in the editor. I didn't have to right-click and say publish. That showed you can actually do the page setup overrides as well. So you can do all of that from the API then. Yep.
At the beginning, you said that the plotting and publishing stuff runs from the core DLL.
I believe it does.
So,
That was changed with 2013.
so theoretically, you wouldn't need to open the file in AutoCAD. You could just run that off.
Yeah, I mean, you can also you should be able to do it from the AC console as well, to some extent, if you really want to truly background plotting as well. And there's all sorts of different things that we introduced with 2013 that you can do it. It really depends on what you want. I mean, you can completely do it offline, though, yeah. Oh, yeah, because you don't have to worry about the screen refresh, yeah. That's why I said you could also start up a process in Windows, the AutoCAD executable with the /PL switch, pass it the DSD file, and it's going to do it in the background. It just basically starts up a second instance of AutoCAD, just like the background publishing does. The problem is you can kind of do it from the API. What happens is when it's done, it crashes on the last drawing because it doesn't know how to return correctly. I'm not sure why, and that's why we're told to avoid it through the API. So there's no errors, no warnings. And there's the file that was created then. So if I go to my documents and settings, here's today's date, today's file. There you go. So if you have sheet sets, you're using sheet sets or not using sheet sets, you sure can use them to automate publishing through the APIs, though. And this is by far one of the requests that I had when I did my sheet set class. People wanted to know how to publish from their sheet sets themselves without having to worry about opening everything. Then I mentioned down here, let's see, where is it? Publish DDoF. I know we're starting to run out of time. Let's see. Is it over here? Publish, override, custom write. So this is just showing how to write a custom DSD file, basically, all from scratch and not using the API then. So I'm using, and stepping through, in this case, I am using the collection for some things, creating the DSD file outward, and then opening that file and appending some custom information that isn't per se part of the API itself. So there are entries even that the Autodesk core publishing platform doesn't support through here, job ID and a few other things, the AutoCAD profile. The AutoCAD profile is important if you plan on using the /PL switch so that AutoCAD knows which profile it should have current when it's running out underneath an external process then. So that's not something that's exposed as part of the API. Any questions? We have about 7 minutes left, I believe. We're done at 2:30. Questions, comments, concerns? Was it what you expected? Not quite what you expected? Yeah? If it went bad, that's fine too. I will take, as long as it's constructive criticism. It's a little bit hard to just show code at times. I mean, I always kind of fear about these types of classes. It's like, it's nothing but code. And there's people coming to watch me run code and explain code. And I'm not sure if, what to really expect at times. If it's exciting, expected something a little bit more exciting from it. It's kind of what it is to some extent. So, but, after you leave here, feel free to email me, comments about the API documentation, more than happy to take comments and fix things as needed, or to try to address concerns. So I can be reached via email, via Twitter. I'm out there, so you should be able to easily find me. So thank you for coming. Questions, concerns, just let me know. Thank you.